Why are excess deaths still a problem now? At a period of time when so many people have died in the pandemic has been declared over. We now seem to be having a situation where we were told that excess deaths weren't a problem. And you can remember Andrew Bridgen almost losing his parliamentary seat in the UK because he dared to ask that question. But this doesn't seem to be going away. And one of the points I made is that whatever your perspective on the pandemic, everybody should want to know if more people than normal are dying, and everyone should want to know why. So, just to give you a little bit of insight into what's happening here, this is what came out from the Office of National Statistics. And this was today. This was what they put on their Twitter feed. They said 13,712 deaths registered in England for the week ending the 31st of January. That's week 5. It was 3.3% higher than the expected normal, what they expected, 440 more deaths. And you may think to yourself, well, that's not such a big deal. It's not very high. It's okay. So, just so that you're clear as to what I'm looking at, you'll understand why I think this is relevant. So I'll show you where the breakdown is of the statistics. This is the figure that was published by the Office of National Statistics. And you can see here the weekly deaths, 18,000 down to 0. So this is the total number of deaths per week. And each bar represents a week. And this is from February of 2023 to the 31st of January of 2025. And you can see in the summer periods, it goes down and then it comes up. Where these bars are, they represent what we would call expected levels of mortality. So this was around the time when Andrew Bridgen was making a lot of noise, because you can see that the periods of time were the bars were higher than the expected. So that represented excess deaths. Okay. And then what happened here is that they changed the formula so that suddenly this period here in January and February is significantly higher. So now it looks as though excess deaths are much lower. And so this was great news going into the UK parliamentary season. There are no excess deaths. It's just a figment of people's imagination. A lot of people who are anti vaxxers, who are making associations and asking questions, it's just inappropriate. I, however, recognized what was going to happen. And this is the point. In June, when I started to think about the COVID storm, and for you who don't quite understand what I mean when I say the COVID storm, this is essentially what I'm talking about, the spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. It's a description of what I'm looking for or expecting to happen in the period of time now. And what it's looking at is the fact that when you have a situation where you have a population that has been highly vaccinated or immune primed, and then they get recurrent exposure to the virus and the spike protein, because of the autoimmune characteristics of the spike protein, you would then have all kinds of strange manifestations. And this is what I predicted. And this is the COVID storm iceberg. You can see minimal symptoms initially at the surface above the water, but deep under the water is chronic immune activation, brain fog, heart attacks, hypertension, stroke, chronic fatigue, breathing problems, all these symptoms that a lot of people seem to be complaining about. And that chronic immune activation, technically, because there was no investigation in excess deaths, has been overlooked. This is where the problem comes. Forget about anybody's stance on what they think and so on. If you see a pattern that is abnormal it should be investigated. In 2022, I saw excess deaths were 9 times higher than 2018 for the age group 15 to 44. And this was the Euromomo statistics. And at that time, I knew there was a red flag. But it's inconvenient. It doesn't fit a political agenda. But that's not scientific. And that's not the responsibility from a clinical point of view. We are not into the politics. We just want to try and manage patients when they get sick. That's how it should be. So if there is a problem, we should ask. It's kind of like seeing a problem with smoking and being afraid to talk about it because the smoking lobby is going to make a fuss. No, if there is an issue, it needs to be addressed. So let's come back to the statistics, and I'll show you now here why this is important. In this image here, what you're seeing is the total number of weekly deaths. This period here, because it's a bank holiday period, it always is lower. So you know that this is the Christmas New Year period. And so this would be January 2024, or just December and January 2024. So if you take the same period in late 2024 into 2025, this is the same period here. But you can see now that the total numbers here, this was about up to just under 14,000. They're above 14,000 here in 2025. And this trend here is significantly higher than 2024 into 2023 to 2024, and even from 2022 to 2023 when the pandemic was still going on. There apparently is no pandemic going on. So what is this? What is happening here? And so now you can see, even though they have put the bars up and said there was no excess deaths last year, it's not working this year. They're going to have to shift it even higher, find some kind of statistical model that will say, oh, let's use a different range. This is not going away. So I'll show you now what I think the line looks like. I put a line in it because I thought that this is relevant here. So this is the same statistics with a line in it. And you can see here, I've covered this first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in 2024. And if you compare it to 2025, this is a problem. Now, my prediction is that this is not going to go down to levels down here. This is going to remain elevated all through 2025. That's my prediction because it fits the COVID storm. And people may say, well, there is no evidence that what I'm saying is true. This is just pure speculation. Again, if you follow the science and if you follow the patterns, it all makes perfect sense. This is information from the hospital and mortality burden of COVID-19 compared with influenza in Denmark. They looked at the period 2022 to 2024. Very important piece of information because as far as I can see, this confirmed what my anticipated outcome was, that this is a COVID storm. Now, I'll show you here in a second what the numbers look like. And what they were looking at here was a very important piece of information. This is influenza. Number of hospital admissions in Denmark is in blue. Number of deaths within 30 days of hospital admission, okay? This is what they found 2022 to 2024. There are 2 peaks in the winter period for influenza. And within 30 days, there were some deaths. It was a bit higher in 2023 than it was in 2022. But that's not a lot different from what we expect, especially in older, frailer patients. But this is now COVID-19. So this is a diagnosis of COVID-19 within 14 days of the admission and the 30-day mortality. For one, you don't see the peaks like with regards to influenza. It almost stays up all year round. mortality follows it as a significantly higher rate, 3 times higher mortality for people who've had COVID-19. And this fits perfectly with the COVID storm because very often the infection is relatively mild. People don't even know. And I'm telling you, because I do look for it, you have to search for the symptoms and you have to seek the diagnosis because it's not obvious. Very often, people only have very subtle symptoms, a headache. They just feel tired, and that's it. And then within a couple of weeks, they're having major events around their health. This is terribly important because it's not just the deaths that are happening, it's the people who are getting sick that are filling up hospitals. And this is why this is going to get worse. Here is the problem. When they looked at the data from Denmark, the potential reason for higher mortality could be that COVID-19 compared to influenza is characterized by more persistent respiratory symptoms, more systemic effects, gastrointestinal symptoms, smell, heart, liver, kidney, and they don't know the mechanism if whether it's direct viral or indirect injury to tissue cells. The pathophysiological mechanisms are not fully understood. I'll tell you now, it is autoimmune. I've said this from the beginning of the pandemic. If you underestimate autoimmunity, it's going to kill a lot of people. This is pretty serious. And the difficulty is that even now, if suddenly the scientific community thought, goodness, Dr. McMillan has been saying this for a while, let's get on with it. This is not easy to reverse because the damage has largely been done with high circulation of virus, recurrent infection, super spreading event over the Christmas period. How do we fix that? We can't. And so therefore, this is why I'm saying when we look at the data, this period of time is not really going to come down. This is what I predict. I would be happily surprised if it does. And I'm shown to be wrong. No problems at all. This has come down. That would be great. But based on the science, that is unlikely to happen. And as I said, I don't mind being wrong on this. But the science tells us that this is what it looks like. If you have that many people infected within a period of time, there are going to be lots of complications. And I didn't even show you the other paper that we knew from 2023. This impact lasts for up to 6 months. It gets less month by month, but the impact in terms of mortality lasts up to at least 6 months. This is a big problem. There is no easy way to get out of it. You have to just remain educated, focused on trying to understand as much as you can. Even what I'm looking at here, I'm still trying to piece it together. It's not easy to do, especially when we don't have autopsies, but we can do our best. So as a final reminder, please remember we have 1 day left in terms of the spike detox. Does everyone need one? It's coming up tomorrow. If you want to join me, this is a very important topic because, as I said, all of this aligns with the high circulation of virus. All of this is starting to fit together. Based on the extrapolation of the science and based on the extrapolation that the spike protein in whatever form drives autoimmune responses, which can affect almost any organ depending on the vulnerability of the individual, the prediction has to be that deaths are going to increase as well as general illness across the population. Sadly, this is the storm surge. The numbers will just keep on rising. They won't stop rising into next year, into the year after, until this is addressed and we start to try and find some way to mitigate the damage. Is it too late? I don't know, but it's never too late to try. Have a good evening.